Chosen one, the flames have finished their lesson and now they forget you. Step into the promotion already waiting at your threshold. You were drawn here by a deliberate gravity. The unseen has archived your suffering and is issuing a new decree for your life. This is why you feel a pull that refuses to be rushed. The curriculum of pain has reached its built-in limit and heaven is preparing to hand you the diploma. Feel it in your bones. Your wounds became armor, scars became credentials. The refining recalibrated your feet to move where you could not before. The prophet's picture of a burning stick snatched from the fire names your rescue as intentional. Your survival is prophetic cargo, preserved for purpose. Are you willing to receive what the furnace forgot? If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. Tread with urgency. Cycles will close with or without your consent, and oppressors lose their authority the moment you refuse to feed their narrative. I will trace 14 spiritual pivots that mark finality. The threshold when heaven intervenes, the interior graduation that cancels reruns, the quiet withdrawal that functions as warfare, and reveal the inner shifts that make repetition impossible. Lean in now as we move into section 1. From furnace to footing, where silence after the storm is actually the sound of your coronation. Receive your notice now. Step forth. The threshold opens and the atmosphere rearranges to you. There is a moment in captivity when the fire remembers its own smallness and you realize it was never meant to be the horizon of your life. You have been a burning stick snatched from the embers, pulled out not as a mistake, but as arresting evidence that you were preserved for a larger narrative. Hear Zechariah's old cry and let it root in your bones. Is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire? That image is not sentimental. It is forensic. The God who plucked you knew that your survival would carry prophetic cargo. The furnace was a frame, not a ceiling, and in the very instant pain exhausts the assignment it was given, the world shifts beneath your feet. This is the first law of threshold moments. Suffering has a built-in limit when you become a new instrument. The fire, meeting its measure, must relinquish you. There is a physiology to this change. The body, the soul, the unseen intelligence that watches over your interior all keep records. They mark graduations in ways your mind cannot always measure. When a season of pain has done its intended work, when it has ground away the parts of you that would not hold the promotion, something in you flips from survival to occupancy. Habakkuk does not speak of mere endurance when he says, "He makes my feet like the feet of a deer." That is a recalibration of movement. It is the musculature of destiny being rewired. You begin to land on steeper ledges, to carry larger silence without wilting, to hear territory inside yourself that was previously drowned out by the clamor of fear. The physiological shift is small at first, a steadier breath, a different relationship to time, but it rewrites the narrative muscles so that repetition becomes physically uncomfortable. Your old patterns can no longer find purchase. Listen for the silence after the storm. That hush is not an absence but a trumpet. Nahum says the end of pain arrives like a herald upon the mountains, a messenger whose feet are the announcement of regained territory. When the oppressor loses authority, it is rarely with thunder. It is with a quiet withdrawal, as if the enemy recognizes a new sovereignty they cannot inhabit. That withdrawal is not passive. It is a spiritual law in motion. When you refuse to answer the old summons, when you stop performing the role of victim, when you stop rehearsing your injury, the system that fed on your response collapses. This is why so many testimonies all sound like the same music. Once the soul claims its new law, the old chambers refuse to echo. The oppressor's tactics go mute because their leverage was your engagement. I want you to imagine your wounds becoming armor. This is not a sentimental claim that pain is good in itself. It is a forensic reclassification. Scars that once exposed you now map your thresholds. Where you once bled, a plate of learning has formed. You will meet people who carry their scars like badges. I have seen mothers who refuse to make their children witnesses to their fear, artisans who turned forced exile into a curriculum for ministry, men who, after a ruinous betrayal, dismantled entire systems of belonging that had propagated their original wound. Each of them edged into the same posture, a settled refusal to repeat. Their daily practice was simple and radical. They named the end. They consecrated the silence that followed, and they walked as though their feet had already stepped into the promised ground. Haggai promised that the glory of the latter house would be greater than the former. Notice that language: rebuilt architecture. You are not patched, you are re-architected. The glory now is structural, not decorative. It changes how you inhabit space and how the unseen meets you. There are practical signs that the threshold has been crossed. You will notice cyclical dreams losing their charge. You will find your hands resting differently when someone tries to pull you into old drama. You will recognize that a certain kind of argument no longer lands because your interior tribunal has convened and given judgment. In Scripture, the redeemed often show an altered cadence. Elijah ascends in a whirlwind while Elisha, who received his mantle, speaks with different authority. The mantle itself signifies a completed transfer. The same happens inside you. Mantle moments arrive as silent certifications. You cannot manufacture them with willpower. You only receive them by inhabiting the changed posture. Breath work, boundary setting, and the fierce habit of saying no without apology are ordinary catalysts. They are not spiritual theatrics. They are the biomechanics of promotion. The anatomy of trauma recovery reframed as initiation is essential here. Too often our culture reduces pain to pathology or moral failure. But initiation is different. It is a curriculum that narrows your options until you embody the skill the future demands. Consider the old, lesser-known psalm that murmurs of passage. You tested us, though you had no need, that you might know what is in our heart. The test is not to humiliate, but to harvest a certain capacity. That capacity is now transferable. The same hands that once trembled now navigate counsels, prayers, and negotiations with a calibrated authority because they were taught in fire how to hold heat. This is not martyrdom. It is mastery of an element. And so the quiet that follows pain is not absence, but the sound of your new law settling into place. The world will begin to recognize you by small things first. A different posture in conversation, a refusal to rehearse old injustices, a steadiness that makes opportunists uncomfortable. Your feet will carry you to hills you could not have climbed 2 seasons ago. Habakkuk's deer-like feet are not an abstract blessing, but an experiential upgrade. The promotion waits at your doorstep like a messenger on the mountain. And when you open the door, you will find not merely relief, but elevation. Not merely rest, but an expanded mandate. This is the mystery. The fire forgets you because you are no longer meant to be contained by it. The release is the universe's way of indicating promotion. You are invited now to stand and breathe in that truth, to let the silence of victory be the new soundtrack. The next teaching will trace the curriculum that pain wrote into you and show how to read the diploma the world cannot issue. But before we cross that threshold, recognize the gift of what has been closed and learn to inhabit your new architecture. Comment, I seal this word in light, if you feel this truth is alive in you today. What we do here every day is possible because of the few who choose to be keepers of this light. I thank them now, one by one, in the silence of my heart. If you want to be part of this circle and receive what cannot be spoken in public, join. The portal is below. There is a classroom no one advertised, a curriculum that arrives in midnight whispers and on hospital benches, in the hollow between betrayed promises and the last coin you kept for the bus. This is not mere suffering. This is tuition. Hear me. The seasons that felled you were not random misfires of fate, but precise lessons written into the bones of your life by a teacher who does not waste a scar. To call pain a syllabus is to change the posture with which you approach it. You stop naming yourself as a victim of events and begin reading the handwriting inside them. In the ashes of what was taken, you will find margins of meaning, and in those margins sits your diploma, the inner credential that the world cannot confer because it is forged beneath the skin, in a private court between your spirit and what refined it. Remember the figure in Zechariah who is called a burning stick snatched from the fire. That image is not of random rescue but of intentional preservation. You were plucked because you are needed alive. Your survival carries cargo. Every betrayal you endured taught you discernment. Every sleepless night taught you endurance. Every loss taught you what you prize and what you can release. These are not platitudes, they are lessons with practical curricula. Betrayal is not merely harm, it is the anatomy of perception. It teaches whose voice reshapes you and whose approval you must refuse to renounce. Sleeplessness is not merely exhaustion. It is the laboratory of faith where your quiet decisions in the small hours become the architecture of future courage. Loss is not merely subtraction. It is the clearing necessary for an altar to be built where only what truly belongs may stand. Consider Joseph, whose dreams were catalogued by brothers who meant to bury him, whose time in prison seemed like wasted years. Yet those same chambers taught him stewardship, fluent negotiation within broken systems, and a humility that could hold authority without breaking. His promotion arrived because he took the class. Less told are the figures like Ebed-Melech who climbed into cisterns to pull Jeremiah out. His courage in a dark pit was a lesson in entering other people's wounds without becoming trapped by them. These examples show a pattern. Initiation is always both crucible and curriculum. The divine pedagogue assigns the test, but you are given the means to pass it, and passing rewrites your story. There are clear spiritual mechanics at work when a season ceases to be repetitive. First, the Spirit records graduation. There is a point beyond which the same vibration cannot find purchase in you because your nervous system, your soul's architecture, has been remodeled. Isaiah hinted at this when he spoke of being refined, not as commodity but as character, an inner alchemy that recalibrates desire and movement. Habakkuk's strange, joyful confession becomes true. Your feet have been changed. You no longer set the same pace or take the same paths. This is the anatomy of trauma recovery as initiation. Each reconditioning of the heart and nervous system is a course completed. When you stop answering the old summons, the familiar pang for approval, the reflex to overgive to secure love, the leftover patterns are exposed as lessons already learned, not traps waiting to be fallen into again. But the soul must demonstrate its learning. The diploma the world cannot grant is practical. It is boundary. It is the ability to say no without apology. It is the refusal to perform pain to win rescue. To extract this credential, you must practice, in small ways that feel trivial and in large ways that feel sacramental. You practice solitude until you carry your own counsel. You practice inner speech until your self-talk becomes law. You practice forgiving without reopening the wound for validation. In these practices, your scar ceases to be a wound and becomes a credential sewn into your gait. This is why repetition is only for those who refuse the class. The unlearned will be drawn, like magnets, to the old setups because they still believe their identity is formed in those collisions. The graduated soul breaks magnetic rhythm. What once called you finds no answer. There is also a necessary humility in this revelation. Teaching does not blame the learner. It reveres the one who made it through. To say pain was a curriculum is not to moralize suffering nor to tidy it into a romance. It is to bear witness to the divine economy that can spin meaning out of ruin. It is to know that sometimes the fiercest seasons were not punishments but promotions in disguise, designed to give you an authority you would not have otherwise held. This is the posture that signals to the unseen. You are no longer a student in need of rescue. You are a graduate called to steward what you survived. The unseen reads posture before it reads prayer. When you stand with the dignity of one who has been schooled by fire, the strategies of oppression, the same old manipulations and entreaties, cannot find a purchase. They lose jurisdiction over you because you have been rewired. Listen to the testimonies that bear this out. A woman who left a controlling marriage after years of feeling responsible for another's and later found herself leading a ministry for women recovering identity. Her classroom was the very pain she once wanted to hide. A back-office worker who was cut from a company learned financial stewardship by candlelight and patience. Years later, he led an enterprise that offered dignity and employment to those the market discarded. These are not fairy tales. They are transcripts of initiation. The diploma shows up in holy work born out of hurt, in a refinement that produces usefulness tempered by mercy. Even small, private changes, learning to sleep without rearranging the grief, learning to eat without medicating sorrow, learning to speak a single no aloud, are acts of graduation that make repetition impossible. At the heart of this curriculum is sovereignty, not the arrogance of assuming you have earned everything on your own, but the settled certainty that your suffering had an author who knew how the story would end. That certainty changes behavior. It makes withdrawal into warfare later possible because you are no longer baited by familiar hooks. It gives you the courage to close doors without returning to forage in the darkness. It gives your feet a new law to walk by, a law written in the bones by the instructor who snatched you from the fire with purpose. Now, as these lessons settle, you stand at a threshold where the next movement is tactical silence and guarded advance. The next section will sharpen into strategy, how to withdraw so that oppression collapses itself, how to form an interior boundary that cannot be negotiated away, and how the posture you have learned here becomes the armor you will wear in the field. Comment, I walk crowned by eternal flame, if you stand in this truth with me today. Every word, every image you receive here is an offering. If you feel this word has touched you today, you can honor it with a sign, right here below with a donation through the Super Thanks button. It is a small gesture, but it opens great doors. There is a terror the enemy cannot name, the silence of the one he thought he still owned. Withdrawal is not cowardice. It is a kind of holy warfare that the world rarely understands because it confounds the rules of engagement the natural mind obeys. Oppression feeds on participation. Every insult you answered, every explanation you offered, every tear that became a public currency, these were the fuel lines that kept another person's power lit. When you quietly close the valves, when you remove your presence from the circuit of accusation and drama, the fire begins to suffocate not because you fought harder, but because you stopped feeding it. In the hush, the mechanics of spiritual authority shift. Heaven recalibrates its hand toward you because you no longer supply the adversary with the material to claim dominion. This withdrawal is tactical, not passive. It is an act of sovereignty that says, I refuse to be rehearsed again in broken roles. I refuse to educate my oppressor in how to hurt me. In that refusal, you begin to wear a new armor, one forged from absence, from boundaries, from the refusal to bleed on demand. Think of Gideon, told to send home the majority so that the victory could not be credited to numbers but to God's intervention. Judges shows us that reduction is not weakness. It is strategy that forces the miraculous to reveal itself. When you withdraw social oxygen from those who thrive on your visibility, you create a field in which heaven can move without human interference. Elijah's flight to Horeb was not spiritual collapse but recalibration. In the cave, the prophet was stripped of performance and prepared for new instruction. You are not hiding. You are being hand-carried into a posture where the next assignment can be spoken clearly without the white noise of old chaos. Jesus himself withdrew into the wilderness and the solitary places to pray. Luke preserves that pattern, because the next season required a refined presence that public life could not produce. Quiet is not absence of power. It is the preparation of power. This is the anatomy of the armor that forms in withdrawal. It is not merely a psychological defense, but a spiritual reconfiguration in which your wounds become stigmata of authority rather than stains of defeat. The places you once bled become sigils on your brow, visible to heaven and to the honest heart, invisible to those who would exploit. The interior shifts are surgical and specific, a recalibration of attention so that your gaze is no longer fixated on what harmed you, but on the margins God now illuminates. A reallocation of emotional currency so that your reserves fund restoration instead of re-exposure. A radical reassignment of narrative so that you are permitted to tell your story from the place of agency rather than as a perpetually hurt child seeking validation. When you do this work, when you stop answering the old summons, you set up boundaries that are not simply walls but gates, and the tactics of manipulation become obsolete because they rely on a predictable, programmable you. Let me give you what I have seen in the field of the Spirit. There was a woman, tender and raw, who for years found herself returning to the same man's circle, answering every text, explaining every silence, polishing his image with her own worth. When she first stopped, the man tried every old trick: guilt, threat, dramatized confession. Then, because she would not perform the part, his allies stopped campaigning for him. His staff of manipulation shriveled because there was nothing to rehearse. Within months, the man's influence diminished, not because she sought to harm him, but because her silence removed the stage. Another brother, once a favorite scapegoat in family gatherings, simply began to leave the room before the accusation could be flung. His absence made his family's accusations lose rhythm. Rituals depend on participants. The oppression collapsed not with noise, but with a quiet vacancy that rendered their scripts useless. These are testimonies of withdrawal as warfare. You withdraw and the system, deprived of its pattern, disintegrates. The inner practices that produce this posture are deceptively simple because their power is paradoxical. Consistency in small withdrawals builds an impenetrable field. The secret is not in grand gestures, but in the steady refusal of automatic responses. Do not mistake this for stoicism. It is a discipline of soul honesty. Naming is part of it. Speak to yourself the truth of your preservation. Like Zechariah's burning stick snatched with purpose, remember your rescue was intentional and crafted for aim. Then, practice the liturgy of margin. Protect your hours, your words, your presence. Let sleep, solitude, and slow breaths be your allies. These things teach your nervous system that you are no longer available for old wounds, and the unseen recognizes that calibration. The enemy can only retool its weapons so many times before God's sovereignty removes their workshop. This is not the end of scrutiny. This is the end of your participation in it. Some spiritual teachers will tell you to forgive quickly so you can be free. Others will demand confrontation. Both can be true at the right grid. The prophetic tactic I give now is this: withdraw first, then allow heaven to teach the posture of return, if return is required. Re-engagement must be authored from authority, not from hunger. Isaiah's words ring here like a bell. In quietness and trust is your strength. Silence becomes the crucible where trust is either confirmed or dissipated. Those who truly love you will not be ruined by your absence. Those who need you for their identity will reveal themselves. When you become a person who will not be used as a rehearsal for someone else's story, your very disappearance forces clarity. Who stands when you are not performing, and who departs because their power depended on your availability. Know this: heaven honors the architecture of withdrawal because it is the language of sovereignty. The moment you stop being a predictable resource for another's selfish agenda, you interrupt an entire kingdom-level transaction. Oppression loses its legal footing when you withdraw your consent. The retrenchment of yourself does what confrontation alone cannot, because the world's systems are woven from engagement and reaction. Deny them those threads and the fabric unmakes. This is not a private tactic but a prophetic signal. Those who have been called to lead and to promote receive instructions in silence so that their next step arrives unmarred by replay. The season ahead asks for people who can close doors behind them with peace, who can guard sanctuaries of self with patience, and who can stand unobserved until called forth with a name from God. As the noise falls away, as your refusal stops the rehearsal, a new voice will begin to speak. The voice that announces promotion rather than return to the old role. Prepare for that voice by tending the margin, by building an interior court where dignity can sit intact. Promotion requires a vacancy. Coronation needs a quiet throne room. Withdrawal is the warfare that clears that room and consecrates your appointed place. When you are ready to step through that threshold, you will not be dragged back into the drama. You will be ushered forward by a summons that only the healed can hear. Comment: I rise marked by the divine, if you feel this word calls your soul. There comes a moment when the soul understands that the road back is not an option because what walked through the fire is not the same as the one who arrived at its edge. Promotion is not a return ticket to plates previously set. It is a coronation that wounds themselves have witnessed and now authenticate. Imagine a king who refuses to wear the same cloak his enemies once spat upon. His scars are the embroidery that proves the throne belongs to him. This is the spiritual geometry of promotion. Your healed scars are not souvenirs of suffering but credentials. They are the parchment on which destiny signs your name. In the ending of that season, there is a divine grammar at work, an arithmetic that subtracts the old authority from those who once ruled over you and adds a new gravity to the steps you now take. The first law of promotion is that suffering, when processed, becomes proof. Zechariah's strange image, is not this man a burning stick snatched from the fire? Carries the posture of intentional rescue. You were plucked, preserved, and handed back with a purpose stamped into your bones. When you begin to narrate your life as rescue rather than random survival, you stop reliving trauma and begin to deploy its lessons as strategy. The woman who once measured her worth by others' approval now measures her steps by the movement of heaven beneath her feet. The man who endured betrayal becomes a sentinel who will not permit the same breach twice. These are not abstract shifts. They are rewirings of the soul's operating system. The neurochemistry of fear softens because the spirit has been recalibrated. Habakkuk's phrase, "He makes my feet like the feet of a deer," is not poetry only. It is a physiological prophecy. You move differently now. You can ascend places your former self could not stand. Promotion tightens the boundaries of your story. There is an interior graduation, an ecclesiastical moment in which heaven issues a diploma the world cannot print. This diploma is the authority to refuse repetition. You will know it by the peaceful decisiveness that replaces frantic negotiation. Where before you argued for permission to belong, now belonging announces itself through your posture. The quiet withdrawals you once practiced as self-preservation become the tactics of sovereignty. Silence becomes a shield. Absence collapses the strategy of those who fed on your occupation with them, and discretion recalibrates power. This is not passive. It is prophetic. When you stop feeding the machinery of your oppression with attention, the machinery grinds to a halt. The oppressor's relevancy decays because they thrived on participation, and you have become a sealed season. It helps to picture concrete scenes. Think of the artist whose work was stolen, who lived in the aftermath as an echo of stolen voice, until a season of recommitment reforged her craft into a new genre that the marketplace could not ignore. Her theft became the very narrative that authenticates her originality. Her healed hurt became the language critics could not replicate. Or consider the minister whose ministry imploded amid scandal. After the embers cooled and honest penitence took root, his testimony read like a map. The collapse that once discredited him became the prophetic credential that opened doors which had been closed. These testimonies reveal the anatomy of initiation. Trauma is not a failed chapter, but the birthing canal of an ordained office. The world will sometimes interpret your return as coincidence. The spiritually attuned will recognize the signature of a soul that will no longer do reruns. There are practical soul shifts that seal the promotion, and they are supremely simple yet fiercely decisive. The first is ownership. Speak plainly to the parts of your life that were once outsourced, your worth, your narrative, your destiny, and say, "This is mine." Ownership is an energetic boundary that tells the unseen realms you now steward your story. The second is consecration. Take what was profaned by pain and set it apart by gratitude, discipline, and service. Consecration rewrites the past with sanctified meaning. The third is forward-focused clarity. Promotions demand a horizon. They are forward-thrusting. When you can see the office, the mantle, the territory God has carved for you, even if it is only a dim silhouette, you align differently. Habakkuk's deer feet do not skip aimlessly. They are calibrated to steep ground and new altitudes. The evidence that a season has closed often feels ordinary before it becomes miraculous. You will notice that old triggers lose their voltage. Conversations that used to open the wounds now pass like rain over steel. You will recognize people who once had authority over your choices beginning to lose their voice in your life. This is not cruelty. It is divine dislocation, an eviction notice from structures that were never meant to inhabit your destiny. Nahum's messenger on the mountains declares good tidings because the announcement itself is proof. Where sorrow once proclaimed dominion, joy now waves a banner. Haggai's promise that the glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former is theology of the promoted soul. What emerges after the burning outshines the ruined former. There is also a sacred prudence in this coronation. Promotion is not a license for indiscriminate triumphalism. It is a stewardship of authority. We began in the furnace where fire taught and then forgot you, and each trial was a sovereign curriculum turning pain into promotion. You learned the 14 pivots that mark finality, felt scars become credentials, and watched oppressors lose authority when you refused their game. Silence after the storm is not absence. It is the sound of victory settling like a new law beneath your feet. This is your coronation. Your wounds now function as credentials, your movement is recalibrated for heights, and repetition is canceled by an interior graduation. Withdraw quietly, guard the boundary shifts you practiced, and watch manipulation collapse as you refuse to feed it. Stand and receive the flames have said their last word. Your feet carry a new law and your survival is prophetic cargo. Like and comment 77 to seal this word and to declare your promotion aloud. In the next video, I will show the single threshold gesture that forces heaven's provision to step into your day. Will you cross? Say yes.